Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Better Dads Club podcast. This week's conversation is with music producer, audio engineer, and founder of Tiny Triumph Recordings, Toby Lloyd. There's a funny story behind this one. Toby and I actually studied audio engineering together more than 20 years ago, but it wasn't until recently that we actually reconnected after I reached out to him about recording some of my own music. And personally, my biggest takeaway from this conversation is how the differences in our upbringing shaped the journeys we've had since studying together. Toby grew up in a home where his parents believed in him and encouraged him to chase his dreams, whereas I grew up hearing from my dad that I'd never be good enough. So it's a powerful reminder of how the impact of stories we're told as kids shape who we are and how we perceive the world and interact with the world. And also a reminder for us to be mindful of how we're doing that to our kids. We also dive into fatherhood, ending relationship with the mother of our kids, parenting through separation, and Toby's experience of remarrying and becoming a blended family. Toby also shares why he chose to walk away from a career that could have led to an Emmy Award. So whether you're a dad navigating co-parenting, thinking about your next relationship, blending families, or simply trying to become a better role model than the one that you had, I think you're going to get a lot from this conversation. Here's my chat with Toby Lloyd. Well, good evening, Toby. Welcome along to the Better Dads Club podcast, my man. I am very excited to have you here this Monday evening. You're in your recording studio right now?
No, so this is my mixing room. So I've got a recording studio in the heart of Wellington CBD. It's like a rooftop studio kind of down by Parliament. And then I also have my mixing studio here. And so most people that run studios, they just have one space. But the reason why I've got two spaces is because I've got my kids, right? And, so on days when I've got my kids, I go and pick them up from school, bring them home, and I carry on mixing. And so I basically schedule my work around my parenting duties. So on days where the kids are at their mum's house, I'm in the recording studio recording artists. And on days when I've got the kids, I do the school drop-offs and pickups and then bring them home. And then I carry on working for a little bit and then cook everybody dinner and all that. So I needed to have the two setups in order to make my hectic work schedule work.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, man, especially with the work that you do. So predominantly the recording that you're doing at the moment is music, or are you kind of still on all aspects of entertainment?
Yeah, so it's primarily music. So it's a lot of artists that I work with, and I've had a very, very privileged career. I worked for a long time in film, and so because of that, I still do film work. So I still mix scores like every so often. I've got a couple of composers around the country that will like kind of fly me up to where they are, and we'll mix a score. I've done a lot of work with Ali Liebman, who we've won a couple of like Silver Scrolls for like the work that we've done on we won some for Savage and for Kafoi Tono. So basically we'll just go and mix the soundtrack, or mix the score, I should say, for films. But typically, yeah, man, it's all like indie artists. It's all artists that are just like, they have a dream and they've got like a vision, or even sometimes they don't have a vision. They want to go and like make music happen. So they come to me and I, basically spend my days trying to make it happen for them.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's actually how this conversation started, right? One of your Instagram ads popped up on my feed and I was like, oh, that's exactly what I want. I want my music to start. I am having these issues because this microphone that I have right now at home is the microphone that I have. And it does sound like this and I want it to sound like that. And then so obviously reaching out to you from that. And then the conversation that we were having was really like, it evolved through to, oh, you're a dad. Oh, you've got a large family. Oh, you got 5 kids. Oh, you're a blended family. Oh, and you're running your own business and you're doing all this stuff. And I was just really intrigued to have that conversation because, a lot of this is around entrepreneurial dads and how do we navigate a growing family with a growing business. And then over the weekend, you've also shared something even more close to home in that you were like, hey, Tom, did you go to Mains? And I'm like, yeah, I did. So just for the listeners out there, so this is completely, I was like, nah, there's no way, this is a bit of a stitch up. But yeah, Toby messaged me over the weekend. He was like, I thought you looked familiar. And then I remember having this memory about, what did you say? You were like, there was this girl that was dancing on your lap in our class. And I'm pretty sure it was you. And I was like, nah, it wasn't me. I don't remember that. If I kind of want to. But yeah, so it turns out we were in the same audio engineering course in Christchurch. And I thought that was again, that's just one of those like small world things. So it was quite
so funny.
So funny. Especially
Yeah, it's
the
wild.
art.
It's
So,
absolutely wild.
you know, you
Yeah.
kind of, it seems from where I'm sitting, it's like you were there, you were studying, and then you were focused on your dream and you carried on and went down your dream. Whereas me, I was down there, I was studying, somewhat focused on my dream, but more focused on the party, making money, I guess kind of like, you know, sort of see the world. And I guess I never went all in on my dream and on that vision and on that goal. And part of it was because a conversation I had with my dad when I was about 16 or 17. And I'd said to him, hey, Dad, like, yep, I want to be a musician when I leave school. That's what I want to go and do. And he said to me, you'll never be good enough. You need to work on a plan B. There's always going to be somebody out there better than you. So even though when I went down to study audio engineering, because I was like, oh, I could do this recording at home, and I could make my own stuff while I'm doing a plan B, so I'm making some money, this would be the way to go. But then also following now, and then I kind of know what's happened over the last 20 odd years for me in that roundabout way. And I'm back here at 40, still going, I still want to pursue my music, but I need to do it in a different way. And my dad is dead, so I can be like, you know, it's just, that's not true. He was not qualified to say that. But then you mentioned in the conversation as well that the relationship with your parents was quite the opposite. So I'd love to hear from you about the house you grew up in, what kind of man your father was, and what kind of relationship you had with your parents, and how that shaped you growing up and getting into being able to do what you do and sticking with it and having such an awesome career as what you've had.
Yeah, man, I'm very, very blessed. I think my parents both had relationships with their parents that maybe wasn't what they hoped it would be. Maybe it was later, but in the early years, I think they realized that they didn't get parented the way that they maybe perhaps would have liked. So I think they wanted to fix that, break the cycle, so to speak, you know, and try and just focus on becoming really good parents. So yeah, I grew up in a beautiful household. We had, you know, very little money, but lots of love. You know, I got 3 siblings and we lived in a tiny house, and my dad was the kind of dad that would coach my basketball team when he didn't even know how to play the game. But he was like, oh, Toby's interested in basketball. You know, from the age of 6, I was just carrying a basketball with me everywhere. And he's like, okay, he's got this interest in basketball. I need to learn the rules so I can coach his team, because the school doesn't have a coach. So he coached my team, and we ended up going to the South Island champs and winning the champions at like intermediate level. And yeah, so he was always there. He was always there for basketball practice. He was always there at the games. And you know, he worked a lot, but he worked kind of through the night and stuff like that. And then he would like get up and go to work and then come back and pick us up from school and all that kind of stuff. So we had that. And mum was a stay-at-home mum, and so she was always there. We always had that house was always a safe place, right? We came home, mum was going to be there, going to look after us, and dad was off earning money as best as he could. And then, you know, would come home and, you know, take us out and do exercise and be out in nature and take us to the rivers and all this kind of stuff. So from a very young age, I had really positive role models that showed me that this path was here, right? And I think it's so important to know that there's a path, right? There's a way to live your life. And actually, I had this. Well, it's a quick side tangent. I had a conversation with one of my friends who he was telling me about how he went off the rails when he was in his teen years, right? And he turned to drugs and turned to partying and stuff like that, and he really fell off the rails. But his parents showed them the path, so he knew that there was a way back to the path because he'd already been on it. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with my kids, right? I'm trying to show them that there is actually a path that they can follow. So they will fall off the rails. They will, you know, deviate and test the boundaries and all that kind of stuff. But as long as they know that there's a compass that points in this direction, they'll know how to head in that direction. And I think my parents are a big part of that. You know, when I started my professional career, I was working really, really hard trying to make it happen as a music producer. And one thing led to another, and I was kind of like, went over to England and then came back to New Zealand, and I ended up in the film industry, and I was working really long hours. Like, those hours are brutal, man. You know, the 100-hour weeks, and you kind of sleep at work, and you'll do a 30-hour day, sleep for 3 hours, do a 24-hour day. You know, you got to do that stuff in order to get the films done. And my son was born, during the second Hobbit film, and he was born. I took 2 weeks off, and then I worked back-to-back 100-hour weeks and didn't see him. You know, for the first month of his life, I was basically not there. And that was really hard. It was really, really hard, and I thought I couldn't make it in music. You know, I'm here chasing it in film because I thought that that's where the money is. That's how I'm going to have a stable career. But it was breaking my heart because I was seeing my son grow up, and I was there as much as I could. I'd drop him off at kindy and then go off to work, and then I'd maybe, if I was lucky, get home just before he fell asleep, and I'd read him a book. And then, you know, try to be there on the weekends as much as possible. And then my second son was born, and the same thing was happening, right? You know, like, he was born, and then we were in a busy period of work, and I barely saw him. Basically, me and my wife at the time, we're divorced now, but at the time, we discussed and we said there's no point me sleeping in the room with her and the baby through the night because the baby's just going to wake her up and he just needs to be fed. So I might as well sleep in the other room and then wake up early when the baby wakes up, take him out and let her sleep. So it was kind of this, thing. I got a full sleep and then would help out in the morning. And I fell asleep in my studio and I was looking around at all my pieces of audio equipment. And I'm just like, man, what am I doing? I'm in the wrong career. I shouldn't be in film. If I stay in film, I'm going to be missing out on the basketball games. I'm going to be missing out on my daughter's school ball and all that kind of stuff. And so I would chat to my old workmates and, these guys have won multiple Academy Awards. I worked with people like Chris Boyce, who's won 4 Academy Awards, and he mixed Jurassic Park and Titanic and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, man, how did you handle being a dad? And he was like, I was never there. I was never there. He even to this day, he'll FaceTime his kids from the other side of the world and he barely sees them. And I was like, man, I need to do something about this. And he's like, honestly, if you can find a way out of this and find any other way to be a present dad and be there for your kids, do it. Because the film industry is amazing. Working on these films are incredible, but it's not worth losing that relationship with your kids over. And so I kind of sat with that for a while and I was like, man, I've got to do something about this. I can't carry on working these crazy hours. I've got to be there for my kids. And it basically at some point in time, I just decided that I had to quit film and focus on music. And I'd been producing bands the whole time I was in the film industry and managed to make enough work and ended up jumping ship and working at a university for 2 years, teaching and running the recording studio at the Massey campus. And through that period of time, built up enough work, built up enough clients that I realized that I had about 6 months worth of artists that I was producing outside of work. And so if I quit my job now, even if I don't get any more work for the next 6 months, I'm good. And so I realized that if I did that, it means I could structure my work how I wanted to. By being an entrepreneur, it means I didn't need to apply for sick days off. I didn't need to book an annual leave. It's just I get control of my calendar. And so because of that, I was able to finally get to that point where I was going and picking my kids up from school and drop them off each day and be there for the basketball games, take them to Kung Fu. And so that was the best career decision I ever made. However, if I stayed at Park Road, the week that I quit, there was the film industry. The week that I quit, they announced they were going to mix the Beatles documentary. And so all of my workmates went on to win Emmy Awards and all that kind of stuff. So I would have, if I stayed a little bit longer, I would have won an Emmy, but it's worth it because I've been there with my kids and I've got that relationship with them that is far better than any award,
Well, you're making a really good point there. I mean, the award is obviously something that sits on the shelf behind you and you can kind of go back and this is something that I did, but your kids and the relationship that they have is obviously something that's forever evolving. And just seeing that success, I'm seeing that with I sort of feel that way with my boy. It's just watching him develop on these little things, and obviously I'm co-parenting as well, so we've seen them sort of 6 nights out of a fortnight, but just that level of growth. And it's tough, in the period where he's 5 nights with his mum, so on the alternating weekend that he's not with me, it's difficult, kind of not seeing them there. So I can totally empathize with you in terms of the working thing. And just what you've said there as well, it resonates with me because before my son was born and his mum and I were still together, I remember essentially visiting sort of an industry expert, a bit of a mentor. And when similar to what you're saying, when his kids were young, he was building his business and he had to be in there long hours and doing all of this stuff. And he sat me down and, he basically said, look, if I want to give it all back because we've got this successful business going on. We've got quite a few clinics and everything, but there's the time that I missed out with my kids in their formative years that I'll never get back. So, and you can obviously go off and potentially you're always going to have opportunity to win another Emmy, right?
Yeah, and it's it doesn't. An Emmy is something for the ego, right? I know so many Academy Award winners and Emmy Award winners, and you know what? It's 5 minutes of glory. It's 5 minutes of oh my God, this is amazing. And then your life goes back to exactly normal, right? It's like hiking Mount Everest, right? You spend years training for it. You spend months climbing it. And then when you get to the top, you're up there between 5 to 15 minutes. The conditions are too harsh that you can't stay for longer than 5 to 15 minutes. So life is not at the peaks, right? Life is on the path and life is on the journey. And you can focus all of your attention on getting that award or getting that that ego hit. It doesn't last long, right? It lasts for a very short period of time. And then you realize, oh, my life is exactly the same. So by focusing on the family, by focusing on the kids, that's lifelong satisfaction, right? And it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to have. But, in saying that, I think it's really, really important to do really good work that you aspire to that level, because then your kids can see what's possible, right? Like my kids have grown up knowing that their dad worked on like the Hobbit films or worked on Avatar. We watched Mortal Engines the other night and they're like, oh, there goes his name on the credits, and for them to realize that we're cut from the same cloth, it means that they can go off and achieve anything. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but since we're in the same class at Mains, do you remember we had Hammond Peake come and speak to us? He was the sound recordist on Lord of the Rings.
I do not recall that particular day. I might have been probably either too high or maybe not in class at that point.
It could have been the second year as well. But anyway, there was this dude up in front of us and he had his Academy Award and he was talking to us and I realized, far out, this dude is no different to me. He is, he's nothing special. He's nothing unique. He's just found what he wanted to do and he tried really, really hard. And what I realized is that you can't fail if you don't give up, right? If you find something that you want to go for and you just keep going at it, you just can't. You physically can't fail unless you give up. And so I saw that I wanted to produce music for a living and I had my kind of eye on the prize and I just kept going and going and going. And even when it felt like it wasn't going to happen, right? I was ready to give up, but I didn't. I just kept going that little bit longer and I'd go and hang out with my friends and we'd go and get drunk or they'd go and get drunk until like 8:30 and then I would leave them to go and party and I'd go back to my house and carry on mixing the project I was working on, and it was that dedication and that focus because I realized that if I wanted to achieve at this thing, then there's going to be 1,000 other people in the country that also want it. And the only way that I can actually get that thing is if I work harder than them. It's like Kobe Bryant, right? It's like practices at 9 o'clock. Cool. He's going to turn up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's the way I figured it was going to be. It was like, I knew that I'm not super smart, not super intelligent or charismatic or whatever it is. I've got no natural gift. The only way I'm ever going to be able to make this work is by just outworking everybody else. And that's what it took. It took working in the film industry until 7, coming home, tucking my son in, reading him a book, and then going back into the studio and mixing until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I did that for years and got massive burnout from it, but it was worth it because it got me to this point now where I do have 5 kids and I basically come home, I check out, I'm like sitting down with my family and we do gratitude every single night around the dinner table and I cook dinner for the kids every single night when they're here. And we've developed that relationship and that ritual. And it's only because when I didn't have kids, I put in all of that hard work,
Let's talk about that a little bit. So you mentioned 5 kids, right? So let's talk a little bit about the family relationships and the family dynamics, along with the mother of your children.
Yeah, so we were together for 17 years, me and my ex. We met when we were 19 and we had a really good relationship. We cared for each other a lot and we had 3 beautiful kids together. They're the light of my lives. They're just the most wonderful humans that I've ever known. And my ex was an early childhood teacher, so she taught me a lot about how to like show up for the kids in those early years and give them what they need. Now, along the way, I realized that the person that I was becoming and the person that I was very, very different to the person that she fell in love with when I was 19. And the things that I cared about when I was 19, as I'm sure you can probably sympathize with, very different to what you care about when you're 36. And so I was getting to a place where I'd been suffering from chronic pain for a long time. And so that led me into things like mindfulness, led me to experiment with psychedelics to try and fix my neurological condition. Started getting really deep into meditation, deep into like ice plunges, deep into hiking mountains, running and all of that kind of stuff. And I realized that to me, I really wanted to live a life of purpose, right? I really wanted to show up for my kids and be a very present dad because what I found was that when I would have a couple of drinks at night and I would wake up in the morning, I was a worse dad. So I was like, right, drinking's got to go. And it's fine because I had 20 years of drinking all the beers, in my teenage years and my early 20s, there was, we did lots of centurions, 100 shots of beer in 100 minutes. And we did days of drinking 36 plus beers, we'd start at 7 in the morning and drink right through. And so when I got to my 30s, I'm like, I don't want to touch this anymore. I've drunk enough. Like I'm good. If I never touch another beer, I've drunk them all. It's fine. And so that was the first thing to go. And part of the reason why that went as well was because I was having health issues. So I just had to get rid of it because I was feeling so crap. And so then I was getting into mindfulness and meditation. I found when I meditated more, I was a better dad. I was more present. I was more patient. And I hated getting up and being grumpy with them in the morning. get them ready for school. And, I was just like being grumpy and all that kind of stuff. And so my life was leading me down this path of presence and mindfulness and trying to live a life with purpose, right? And my partner wasn't. She was, she was wanting just a busy job, and she was wanting to come home, eat pizza and watch Netflix. And you get to a point in life where you're going in two separate directions that you can't see the forest for the trees anymore. So I really struggled. Because I came from a house where my parents are still together to this day, and I didn't know what a broken home was like. Very few of my friends came from broken homes. The only one that did, he was deeply traumatized and really affected him. So I didn't know what that looked like. So I was hating myself, and I was sitting there just like furious. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm wanting to leave this relationship, and it's like, what's it going to do to the kids? And I was just, the worst period of my life was that period of time, realizing that I was the cause of my family's separation, right? Because I just didn't love my wife anymore. And I tried to do all these things. I, tried trips to try and see if I could reprogram my brain into re-loving them and all this kind of stuff. And it just didn't work, because we were two different people that wanted two different things. And there was some stuff around the way that she was parenting that I wasn't happy with in the time. I felt like she was always on her phone, and she was always eating junk food and all that kind of stuff. And I was trying to lead by example and be present with the kids and not feed them all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it got to a point where we couldn't find a way through it. We went to therapy and all that kind of stuff. And we realized that we'll do a trial separation. We're like, we'll separate, we'll stay living in the same house, but we'll just have like a parenting roster where she does like 2 nights on, and on those nights I can do whatever I want, and then, sleeping in different rooms and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we just never went back. We never got back together. We stayed living in the same house for a year and being separated, and it was toxic as hell from like a depression standpoint, because even though we were showing up for the kids and giving the kids what they needed, between the two of us, it was ice cold. There was nothing there, just average communication. There was no negativity, but there was just nothing. And so we spent a year like that, and finally told the kids, right, where it's just like, hey, just to let you know, we actually separated a year ago, but as you can see, your love, you're so loved, right? Nothing has changed. Your mum and dad aren't together anymore, but that doesn't mean that you have like an absence of love, because nothing has changed on that front. And I think because we did it in that way, they realized that their love was safe, right? They've got a mum and dad that don't love each other anymore, but the kids are still loved. And so we stayed living like that, co-parenting in the same house, and the kids, they handled it really, really well. And at some point in the line, about maybe a year and a half after I separated from my ex, at that point in time, I was just convinced I was just going to be a monk. I was just going to, walk the mountains and like not do anything. I wasn't going to date. I was just going to be a good dad. I was like, I'm going to be a good dad and a good music producer. Those 2 things are enough. That's all I need. And then I fell in love, and she just somehow, met my current partner, my current wife, and she has twins. And at the time, they were 2 years old, so 2-year-old twins. At that time, my daughter was 5, my other son was 7, and my older son was 9. And so after being together for like 9 months, we moved in together, and it was intense. It was real intense coming into a blended family situation, right? Because I'd never come from a blended family. I didn't know how that worked. I just assumed that things would be a lot easier than what they were. Turns out it was really hard, and I was humbled by the whole experience. But luckily, because I had my mindset in order, because of those years of really focusing on mindfulness, presence, meditation, we got through that really, really tricky, challenging blended family situation. Because man, as you can imagine, 5 kids in one household, when you're not used to, especially 2 kids that aren't your own and 3 kids that aren't my partner's, it's like, how do you navigate that whole situation? But we worked through it, and we just had lots of open communication around it. And now we've got such a beautiful life with these beautiful kids, and they all get along so well. And, they call my wife mum, and she calls them her kids as well. And I'm very, very, very lucky and very blessed.
That's great to hear, Toby. There's a couple of questions that come to mind for me. The first one is around the separation process for you. You come from a solid family, and the example that you have of a broken family wasn't that great. How did that conversation start when you're sitting there and you're going, actually, you know what? I've been in this mindful presence state, and I'm focused on here's what I want to do, and I can see that this is not what you want, and there is an incompatibility here in life. And not to mention, like, actually, where are my emotions? My emotions are not here. There's not a love here. So, how did you bring that conversation to the table?
Man, it was hard, and I was a coward basically. Like in a lot of ways, like I found it really hard to communicate it because again, I had so much self shame from what I was doing to the kids, right? Because I'm like, man, the kids don't deserve this. The kids deserve parents that love each other. So yeah, it was really really hard, and basically, I just for a while I was like, we need to go to therapy. We need to go to therapy, and then finally, when I think I was at like a tipping point, she was like, okay, let's go to therapy. So I went to therapy, tried like 3 different therapists, and it got to a point where one of the therapists was like, okay, we need to separate this out, and we'll do isolated therapy because it, turned out my ex, she had PTSD, which was undiagnosed and all this kind of stuff. So she realized that she needed to go and communicate that with her. And then through sessions with them, the therapist was like, okay, I'm no longer seeing you anymore because now she's my patient. And I was like, what? I really need help right now because I'm struggling to get through this. And the therapist basically said to me that if you're wanting your wife to be something that she's not, that's not fair on her because she's never going to be the person that you actually want her to be. And you need to decide whether you can love her as she is, because if you can't, then you've just got to let her go, because it's so unfair to like love someone on the condition that they are a certain way. And what I needed from relationship at that point in time that I realized was communication. I needed someone that I could have open, honest dialogue with, communicate back and forth without the person like shutting down and freezing, and I ended up having some friends, right? I had some friends that were girls, and like I would chat to them and I was like, oh, this is so nice. It's so nice, like being able to just openly have these conversations. And I realized that was actually something really, really important to me in a relationship. And so when the therapist was like, she's never going to be what you need her to be, I was just like, damn. And I knew she was right. I just needed someone to tell me that my feelings were right, that this wasn't the right relationship. And so I was a coward a lot of the time because I was just so petrified of everything. But I wish that I could rewind time and do things differently. Maybe I don't, because I don't believe in regrets. But man, if I knew that I was putting so much focus on what the kids needed in the marriage, that I totally look past the point that the kids will be fine as long as they're getting what they need from the parents, right? And so if I knew that, God, I would have saved myself so much heartbreak. I would have probably left the relationship earlier, but I was so petrified. And now, we separated 5 years ago or something like that, and the kids are so well balanced, they're so loved, and they've got so much support. And I kicked myself that I was beating myself up so much about it, because man, as long as I was showing up for what they needed, they were going to be fine. I didn't know that though, because I didn't come from a broken household, or blended family or anything like that. So I just assumed that they were going to end up depressed and struggling. But yeah, lessons along the way, eh?
Well, yeah. And this is one of the things that I was talking about with Trey Tucker a couple of weeks ago, was around the fact that if you hadn't gone through that and you hadn't learned those lessons, you wouldn't be able to sit here to me today and then go, oh, I wish I could turn back time and go back and do this differently. So from that, a couple of questions, just in terms of, like, if you could maybe give a bit of an idea in terms of how, when you say you were a coward for a long time, and how long would you say that you were sitting in this? Because sometimes it can feel like it's a long time, but actually in hindsight, it might only be a month or 2 or 3 months, maybe.
I would say it was probably a year. It was like around March 2020, either 2020 or 2021. And I remember just being like, just starting to feel depressed. I was like, man, like something's not right. And I knew what it was. I just was too much of a coward to admit it to myself. And then we kind of went through the year, and I was just like, man, I just wasn't happy in the relationship. She would want to go and sit in bed and watch Netflix, and I'd be wanting to meditate or read or talk about art, talk about music, talk about, whatever. And they, just wouldn't want to communicate. And so I was struggling. And then we got to Christmas, and I basically said, hey, we're going down to Nelson. Can we just go away as friends? Can we just go away and like not try and work on the relationship? Can we not go and try and solve anything? Can we just go down as friends that are looking after our kids? And so that was the first of it. And then when we came back, I was like, that was so nice. That was really nice not being married for that period of time. But I still didn't. I was still too much of a coward to say that. So she came up with the idea of the trial separation. And there's a lot of things that I'm not necessarily happy about in the process of being separated. But I'm so forever grateful that my ex had the courage to say, we need to separate, or we need to trial separate, and then eventually we need to separate. And yeah, again, I was too much of a coward. Now I went away on a silent retreat. Through that period of time, went on a 9-day silent retreat. No, 7-day silent retreat. And through that period of time, I came away with this absolute sense of calm and bliss. And I knew at that point that everything was going to be fine, right? I knew that I had been raised in a way that I was going to show up for my kids and give them everything that I could give them. I'm a big believer in determinism. I don't know if you've come across that concept in your life, but it's basically the ideology that everything's just happening, and what's happening is based on our biology and our environment, right? We can't choose our thoughts because our thoughts are largely impacted by the way that we were raised, the stories we were told, and our biology from our parents, right? And so when you get to this place that you realize that you're being exactly as you were raised to be and your biology raised you to be, then you can actually start forgiving yourself. You can forgive yourself for your own shortcomings because you're like, crap, okay, I'm just being a Toby right now. This is the way that a Toby was raised to be. This is a way that my mind was wired to be. And so I was like, okay, cool. I know my shortcomings. I know where I'm going wrong. I don't want to experience those shortcomings, so I'm going to try and do better. But when I don't live up to my own standard, then I need to go easy on myself because I couldn't have done better in the moment. If I could have done better in the moment, I would have done better in the moment, right? And the whole process goes like this. Like when I woke up this morning and I looked in the pantry and I chose what I was going to have for breakfast and I pulled it down and I made it and then, went about my day. If I rewound time to exactly that moment with exactly every atom, every molecule, every particle in the universe exactly the same way, I couldn't have done anything different because nothing was different, right? Everything was going to play out exactly like what it did in the moment. And sure, you can aim to do better in the next moment, but in that moment, I did precisely as what I did. And so with that kind of philosophy, it gives you the sense of being able to forgive yourself for your own shortcomings and forgive yourself when you do wrong. And then, of course, you aim to be better because, you don't want to suffer, you don't want to have those feelings and all that kind of stuff, but you can also go to forgive yourself for all your shortcomings. So that's been like a really, really helpful tool for me when I'm parenting, because what ends up happening, right, is I'll act in a way as a parent that doesn't live up to my high quality standard, and I go and apologize to my kids. I apologize to my kids all the time because I don't think it's healthy for my kids to think that their dad is perfect, right? That gives them a very, very unrealistic expectation of what it is to be human. It gives them this unrealistic expectation for how they're going to show up in the world. So when they see their dad fail and then own up to his mistakes and say, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have acted in that way, I shouldn't have reacted, all of that kind of stuff. It gives them this blueprint that goes, we're going to make mistakes. Cool. And here's what we do when we make mistakes, right? And I think that's a really, really important thing because I know so many people that have gone through their lives who have said, my parents never once said I'm sorry. They never once apologized for their behavior or anything like that. That's toxic as hell, right? Because we will make mistakes all the time. And it's a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing for your kids to actually see mistakes and then be armed with the tools on how to rectify that.
Toby, thank you for your vulnerability there and your willingness to admit the cowardice. We've all been there. I know for me, prior to separation, that was very much the same feelings that I had internally. There was a weakness to admit things and a weakness to, out of fear, just actually go, this is not what I want. I'm not happy and I don't know how to say it because if I do, I'm afraid that I'm not going to, it's not even that I'm not going to be there with my son. It's that she's going to take my son and I'll never see him. So I'm going to lose all of that. I'd like to ask, it turns out that the way you were thinking about the situation was actually incorrect. But, there are so many men out there in the world right now in that situation where they are in relationships and they are going on and it's business as usual daily and they are feeling the sense that actually I don't want to be here. This is not the environment that I want to be raising my kids. This is not the kind of relationship that I want to be showing my kids. And they're feeling that sense of, I need to leave, I want to leave, but actually I've got this commitment here. I'm trying to be the best dad that I can. Trying to be here for my kids. I'm trying to show them what a good, strong relationship might be. And maybe they're like me and they came from a broken relationship and they're going, actually, no, I need to stay here because I'm here to heal these wounds and that's part of it. And if I leave, then I'm just repeating the pattern. But for you, obviously, yours was different. You came from a positive family, good, awesome relationship with your dad. If you could go back and say to yourself, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, well, I think I heard a great quote the other day, which was something like, don't make decisions when you're in murky water, right? And I think it's really easy to be in a situation like that and and not see the situation for what it is, right? And the way that we look at the world is basically colored by all of our experiences, right? Every story that we were told growing up, like the way that we see our world is often infiltrated by our upbringing and all that kind of stuff. So first we need to determine, am I seeing the situation clearly for what it is, or am I seeing a projection of my own view on it, right? And so I think diving into mindfulness was very, very important for me because it made me see clearly how I was actually feeling and what the situation was, right? Because it is easy to believe our own BS, like to actually, maybe even think that we're better than what we are in relationship. And we may think, oh, it's our partner, that's the problem, not realizing it's us, it's a problem. So first, I think being honest with ourselves through like mindfulness practice and actually kind of understanding our own minds. But man, I do think at least trying, right? Going to therapy and trying to talk to a therapist. Because if it doesn't work out, at least you would have known that you tried, right? And to me, that was really, really important to be able to tell my kids, hey, like when I went through the separation with your mum, we really tried. We didn't just give up straight away. We actually gave it a shot. Now, the other party might not be willing to do that. And in those situations, then that's completely different, right? You can't control how anyone else is going to react. You can only control how you act. And so I'm really glad that we went through the process of going to therapy. It cost a little bit of money, but it was worth it because we gave it a good crack. Now, if it's in one of those situations where the relationship is toxic and you're feeling like it's actually not a good thing for you to be in, like it's actually, it's poisonous, then it's okay to leave. But as long as you're actually still showing up for your kids and giving them what they need, like that's all they need. They don't need parents that are still together. They just need parents that love them, right? And I think in those situations when you're in a relationship where one person's toxic and one's not, when you break out of that relationship and the parent and the child gets to now live with both of you, when they're with you and that's a positive environment, then that is going to be far better than if the two of you stay together in that one environment, because that negativity and that toxicity is going to infiltrate your mind and your way of parenting. At least this way, it means that 50% of the time they can see a really positive role model, 50% of the time they might not see that and they might go, oh man, I do not want that. I want this. This is the important part. The other thing I will say, one thing that I've realized that is the beautiful thing about blended families, like if you separate and there's a whole world of possibility out there, you shouldn't just jump ship because there's a whole world of possibility out there, because you'll never settle down, you'll never find anyone, because you'll just think, oh, grass is always greener, right? But the beautiful thing about splitting and having my now current partner is that my kids don't just have two people to be aggregates from. Now they've got a third person, right? Now they can take the good attributes of my wife. She has many, many beautiful attributes, and they can take those inspiring parts of her. They can take the best parts of me. They can take the best parts of their mum. Whereas prior to that, it was just the two of us. Now, I'm not advocating that everyone should separate. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there is this beautiful thing that when you have multiple positive role models in your life, you can actually draw the best little bits from it. So yeah, I would just say, like, at least try, so then you can know in your heart that you did what you could. And if it doesn't work out, then you know that you tried your best. And that's all you can do. You can't try better than that, right? You can't do better than what you can in the moment. Otherwise, you would have done better. So there is this kind of like peace that comes along with that, I think.
Thanks for that. And yeah, I hear what you're saying around the blended family now bringing in different aspects. And now there's also other kids that are there as well that your kids also get to play with, right? When there's, or they've got interactions that they've now got to navigate with their own relationships on a sibling level. You mentioned just getting back to the joining or that introduction for the blended family. I've actually got two questions here, because there's a big piece for me in that I grew up in a pretty unsafe environment. Like looking at it now, and any psychologist will go, yep, that was an unsafe environment. Like father was an alcoholic. Every night for me was I'd be going to bed and my parents would smoke and drink, and I'd hear dad, like my room was on the other side of the living room wall, and I would hear dad walking down the living room, turn up the music, and then I'd just hear him, he'd be yelling at mum, and so I'd be kept awake from loud music. And there were moments where I would get up and I would walk down the hallway and I'd be like, man, I want to stop my dad from yelling at my mum as a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid. And there was one incident, and I've brought this up with my mum recently as well. There was one incident where my mum probably had a really stressful night the night before. Dad had gone to work. She's trying to get me to school, to get ready for school in the morning. And I'm sitting there and I'm faffing about doing whatever seven-year-olds do or 8-year-olds do. And my mum just yells at me and just goes, well, if you fine, I'll just leave and I might not be here this evening. And she just walked out the door. And I had to get myself to school. Now, I wasn't, me getting myself to school was not the problem because that was something that I did quite regularly, but it was just more to then now be thinking, my mum might not come back this evening. I'm now going to be living with this father who is, inconsistent, essentially. I don't know if I'm going to get smacked or praised. There's yelling, there's, abuse, it's loud music all night. Like I don't want to be here. And I knew sort of from that moment that my parents were not supposed to be together. This was not right. This wasn't what I was seeing with the relationships, on TV in terms of, I was a 90s kid raised watching, Full House and all that sort of stuff, like nuclear family sort of style things. Or even, it was even worse than The Simpsons, right? Like Homer was an alcoholic, but he's like a functioning alcoholic and not abusive to the kids. Well, actually, what am I talking about? Homer's terribly abusive. He strangles his son all the fucking time. But, there was a point for me where it was like, this is just not the environment that feels good. And it wasn't until 4 years later that my mum had, to use your words, it was around courage, but not just the courage, but also the financial support and the ability to be able to leave my dad. So for 4 years, I knew that this relationship, and one other thing I should say in there as well, like it also wasn't the same template as the relationships for the kids that were in my neighborhood because they all had really great dads. And so we were kind of like this odd family out. So for 4 years, I'm sitting there going like, my mum needs to leave my dad. They're not right together. And that was the environment and the vibe that I was picking up on. So I'm curious with your kids, when you said that you didn't tell them for a year that you were separated, but you were still doing the co-parenting thing, living in the house. I'm wondering if you've had conversations with your kids, whether they were actually picking up on that or what they remember. And have you guys had a chance to speak about that at all?
Yeah, look, I've got a really, really open communication with my kids. They can ask me absolutely anything and I'll give them an answer. Now, there may be at times where they ask me something that I'm like, hey, just to let you know, like that's not really an age appropriate question. So I'm not going to answer that. But when I feel like you're old enough to be able to understand that, I will talk to you about that, right? So we've got this very, very open communication style where they can come to me about anything at all, right? Anything that's going on at school. My oldest son, he's 12. He's already had 3 girlfriends. So we get to sit down and, cuddle him when he's had his heart broken and all this kind of stuff. So they know that they can come to me for any question. And also through that open communication as well, like I always tell them that like, I will always help you with a solution, right? If you come to me with a problem and you're like, man, I really messed up, like I'm not going to like sit there and go nuts at you. We'll try and work together on a solution. So I've made it a very safe environment for them to come and talk to me, right? Any problem they have, we'll work through it together. But yeah, so we've talked a lot about what they've felt in those years, but man, they didn't know. They had no idea because since the day that they were born, I gave them so much love, and they in that dynamic, they were dad's kids, right? Mum was there and she would, of course, give them cuddles and all that kind of stuff. But I was the one getting up and playing trains with them at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was the one taking them down to the park and pushing them on the swings and going to the swimming lessons. And while the other party was there a lot more, they weren't necessarily communicating with the kids as much or playing with the kids as much. So it was a bit more of a nurturing role on that side. But for me, it was more just like, man, these are my kids. Like, they're my friends, like, let's go and play and hang out. And so they actually preferred it in that period of time because now my attention wasn't being split to their mum. Now they were just getting all of my attention, right? So anytime we were together, they just had uninterrupted dad time. And to them, it was like the best year because every single night we would sit at the dinner table and we'd play Monopoly, or we'd sit at the dinner table and we'd play chess, right? And so we developed these like nighttime rituals around dinner, which we still do to this day. Like, we play Monopoly Deal at the dinner table with all of us, and we do gratitude every single night. All of the kids have to go around and say three things they're grateful for. We all eat dinner at the table, no TVs or anything like that. Very little screen time in our house. So they've always had that ability to come and talk to me. And I think if anything, they preferred it because they were like, oh man, this is great. We just get dad. We just get to play with dad. And there's like, he's not getting distracted and going off and doing all this stuff. Now that's obviously changed because I'm married now and I've got a wife that is like one of my favorite people in the world. And I just want to hang out with her all the time. So the kids they do have to take turns with my wife of the attention that they get from me. But the beautiful thing about this now is because I separated, because we split and I've met my now wife, who's like my favorite person, the kids are now growing up in a house where they see two parents who are best friends. And the kids get to now see that really positive relationship. And even though the last relationship had beautiful things about it, it's very, very different to see two parents who like just communicate with each other so effectively and are just hanging out and laughing and chatting and all that kind of stuff. So now not only have I given the kids like a strong moral compass of like, here's the path, but now also giving them that sign of like, hey, this is what a relationship can look like. This looks like a healthy relationship. Because in the last relationship, I realized very, very early on that I loved my kids more than I loved my wife. And so when I was in that dynamic, I was putting all of my attention into the kids because this part over here wasn't fulfilling me and it was kind of eating me up. So I was like, I need to just focus on being the best dad, right? So now the kids have the best of both worlds. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
That's awesome to hear. And a really cool realization in terms of where your love's being funneled and where that time and attention. But that level of dynamic of going, well, actually, this is what a healthy, loving relationship looks like. I think that's a beautiful thing, man. And you mentioned, I'd love to go back just because you mentioned at the start about how hard that was in terms of you had this expectation that things were going to go a certain way, but actually the reality of that blended family, bringing that together was far more difficult and it was hard. I just like, if you wouldn't mind just maybe unpacking a little bit of was there anything specifically that was hard? And if you could do it again, would you have done it a different way?
Yeah, man. Honestly, I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, my wife would definitely have loved it if I did it in a different way. The tricky thing in my situation was because me and my ex were really focused on giving the kids what they needed in their year of separation. It meant that we lived in the same house, right? In New Zealand law, when you separate from your wife, you've got to wait 2 years from living in a different house before you can get divorced. So my wife was my current partner, when we first met, she was technically dating a married man. Me and my wife had separated, but we, were still married because you got to wait those 2 years. And that was really, really hard on our relationship. That was really, really hard on my partner. Me and my ex, we co-owned a house together that she was still living in. And so my assets were tied up in there. And so it was, for me at that time, I was like, as long as I show up and I'm loving and I'm like supportive and I give you exactly what you need to my current partner and my intentions, we're all good. Because like I was in this kind of like spiritual phase of just being like meditating like an hour a day and just being like, it's all good, like it's all love. But for her, that was really, really hard because, she had her own stuff to unpack from her childhood around similar situations like this. And so it really was really, really difficult on the relationship that we were living together, but I was technically still married to someone else, still owned a house with someone else. And I do wish that I had been able to disentangle a lot of those like more logistical things prior to putting myself out there and meeting a partner and just having that clean cut. It would have made my life so much easier. And there's still remnants of that kind of prop up in our relationship where we have to work through. But yeah, also I think just having really firm communication, or really, really open communication, I should say, around expectations, right? Like, so when we first moved in together, me and my wife, my current wife, and she's got 2 daughters and I got 3 kids. How do you discipline, right? How do you discipline her daughters, and how does she discipline my kids? Because as soon as someone says something negative about your kids, even if it's your partner, you can have a very negative reaction, because maybe they don't discipline in a way that you want them to discipline. So there was all these little quirks in that blended family that were like, whoa, this is really, really difficult, right? Like because her daughters were toddlers, so they would have tantrums, and it was like, okay, well, how am I allowed to respond in that moment to be supportive of my partner, but also to not allow crap behavior in the house, right? Because, me and her have different parenting styles. And so I don't let my kids act in a certain way, and she might, but she might also let her daughters not act in a certain way that I might. And so it's just about open communication, right? I think it's realizing that you both have the same goals. How you get there is two different ways, and as long as you've got the right relationship where you can communicate about these things, to be like, hey, that way that you talked to our son earlier, I didn't really like that. I don't think that was the best way to do it. So if you can remove the ego from the process, and if you can step back and be like, okay, we've got two people here that really care about creating a positive outcome from this family, you can just be you can be focused on the solutions. Because, man, emotion comes into this, right? And it's very easy to be like, oh, that's impinging on my sense of self, right? Like you're questioning the way I'm raising my kids or whatever. When that's not what it is at all, it's purely just like, hey, how do we get the best out of the situation? And I think if you come into that with a kind of humble attitude, with modesty, to be like, this is really tricky. Neither of us have navigated this before. Let's give each other a lot of grace because we're both going to make mistakes. We're both going to fuck up from time to time. If you can kind of give each other that grace to realize that you're both flawed humans, you're both going to make mistakes, but you're trying to learn and you're trying to work together, I think that solves it, right? I truly don't think there's a problem in this world that can't be solved with better communication.
That's a really good point. Prior to entering into the relationship, but also prior to moving in together and actually bringing the kids in, had you had conversations or any consideration that might be something to talk about beforehand? Or, what conversations were you guys having before D-Day, before moving in?
Yeah, so me and my ex, we had a rule that if we got in relationships and we wanted that person to meet our kids, then that partner has to get approval from our ex, right? So like when I met Liv, my current wife, we'd been together for maybe like 2.5, 3 months maybe. And she had a rule that basically she wasn't going to introduce her children to a man unless she was in love with them, right? And so finally, when we realized we were in love, that door opened to like meeting her daughters. And then with my children, it was a case of being like, okay, I really love you and I want to introduce you to my kids. So now you've got to go and have a meeting with my ex-wife. And she's, she's got to be like, yep, cool, this person's safe. Now, I am very, 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 and I didn't actually expect to talk about this on this podcast. I'm very, very grateful that happened because my wife, my current wife, she got approval from my ex, and it was great, and that developed that trust, right? It's like, cool, this is an amicable relationship. Now, my ex wanted me to meet up with someone that she was seeing, and so I went and met with this guy, and straight away I was like, this guy is giving me awful vibes. This is such a bad energy. There's something not right about this guy. And he was asking me all kinds of personal questions, and I felt deeply uncomfortable. And so I didn't know his last name, but I knew his first name and his job. So I went home, I Googled his first name and his job, and sure enough, there was like Vic Deals pages about how this guy's a scam artist. He's like ripping people off thousands of dollars. He was also, community service multiple times, like had to go on into bankruptcy multiple times because of like ripping off customers and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, oh crap, this dude is really, really bad news. And so I reached out to my ex and I was just like, hey, have you seen these articles? And she basically said like, no, it's all lies, because he was a scam artist. He'd fooled her into believing his lies. And so at that point, I was just like, no, you're not allowed to introduce the kids to this man. He's a really, really bad person. And so on one of the Vic Deals page, I saw this person say that they were talking to this guy's ex-wife. And so I reached out to this person. I was like, hey, can I have their details just to find out, I would love to just chat to the ex-wife just to see if these rumors are true or not. And the ex-wife messaged me and she was like, whatever you do, do not let your kids near this man. He is way worse than what is written about online. And so luckily, because of this safeguard that we had in place, I was able to protect my kids from actually meeting this person who has gone on to do very, very bad things and has caused a lot of issues in my ex's life. And I'm very, very grateful that those things were in place, because if those things weren't in place, then the whole situation could have been far worse than what it was. And luckily, the kids are safe, they're happy, and wouldn't know otherwise. But yeah, Those safeguards are important.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally agree. I mean, that's definitely one thing that I've had in my head. We haven't had an opportunity to have this discussion yet, but my son's mum, she'd put in a stipulation about, hey, we've got to be with somebody for at least 12 months before we introduce them to our son. And I was like, at the time, I was incredibly depressed. This is, it was only probably like six or 7 months after sort of I'd left, and so I was incredibly depressed and down, and going, well, I'm worthless. Like I'm a piece of shit, and I'm probably never going to be with anybody anyway. So sure, like whatever, it doesn't matter. But the funny thing for me was that within a short period of time, not long thereafter, my boy was actually started talking about this man that was coming around. That was Mum's friend, and I was like, this is weird. And then within probably a week or two of him mentioning this man, she said, "Oh, I've been seeing this guy," and I was like, number one, I'm sitting there going, like, you put this rule in place about 12 months. You haven't, in my opinion, it feels like it would just be a courtesy to say, hey, I'm going to this is the person that I'm seeing, and I want to introduce them to you first so that you can have an adult conversation, and I can either be there to mediate, but actually, you know what, I don't want to be there to mediate. I'd rather you guys actually just have a conversation and see if you can be adults in a room. And maybe it was silly for me to kind of to have an assumption that would be the way to go, because that just seems like a natural way to go. But yeah, I mean, sure enough, they're not seeing each other anymore anyway. So, which again kind of leads me back to that point of, well, I understand now where the 12-month thing is important, or to what you said around your current wife, where she's like, well, I'm not going to introduce it until I know that I'm in love with this person, until there's actually been some time, you've had some reps, some runs on the board to be sure that this relationship's going to last a distance. And obviously we can never say the distance, because who knows?
Yeah.
But, for all, intents and purposes, to say, no, I'm with this person. We've got a really good relationship. We've got great rapport. We've got, like, regardless of whether they've got kids or not. But I think this person's going to be great around our kids. We talk about them all the time. And, and I want to have this, have the community around and make sure that our kids have got this network together where as you said so beautifully earlier, it's like they don't just have you and their mum, they now also have this other mum in the situation too. So that's really quite cool. Just on a side note, and just probably more of a personal question, like, is the father of your wife's kids still in the picture? Like, do you guys get along? Do you guys have conversations?
Yeah. It's real funny. When I first met my now wife Liv, she was just like, yeah, my ex is 6'6", and he's like Lebanese Canadian, and I was just like, oh god, this dude's like, and like,
go shoot some hoops.
And so yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, now it's like that. But yeah, at the time I was like, oh man, this is intimidating. And we get along great, man. He's such a good dude. He's even the NBA finals were on a couple of weeks ago. I was like, come around, like, bring your missus. Let's watch the game together and stuff. And so we've got that relationship now where it's like we get along great. I go and drop the twins off at his place, and we'll shoot the shit about the NBA, and and yeah. We're on Facebook Messenger together, like talking about the NBA trades and all this kind of stuff. So it's really, really beautiful to have that relationship, and because I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's best for the kids, right? He didn't have that growing up. He had parents. He grew up in a blended family, and his parents were like at each other, but he was the messenger between them, and all this kind of stuff. And I won't go into his story, but I think from his childhood, he realized how important it was for me and him to actually have that really positive relationship, because that impacts the kids, right? And it's the same thing of what we were just talking about before, like having those security measures in place about meeting your ex's partner. Most domestic abuse happens in the household, right? And it's very, very easy when you fall in love to be tricked by smoke and mirrors, and to see a person for who you think they are rather than who they are. So when you've got someone that comes in and meets them and their main priority is the well-being of their kids, then they're probably going to see something slightly different. Now that can be problematic, right? But I do think that there's something there where it's like, when you really both care about your kids, then like having those things in place are really, really important, because of how much harm can be done in the home, And so, yeah, I would say for anyone out there that's like going through separation or thinking about like bringing in their partners, like have those things in place, because man, the kids are the most important thing, and it's amazing how just one bad influence can affect their whole lives.
That's really cool. That sounds like a really nice way to spot to end this podcast, my man. Toby, thank you very much for your time this evening. Before you go, I do just want to ask, 20 years from now, what do you hope your kids say about their dad?
I just hope that they remember how much they're loved. I just hope that they know that, look, I'm very safe in love, right? Like I feel I've grown up in a household where love was never a conditional thing. It was never something that was just like that I had to earn. It was like regardless of if I aced the test or if I won the basketball game, my love was safe. So that meant that I just got to explore the world and just like really just try and do things, and it wasn't to try and get approval from someone else, right? And so I would hope that my kids have that same sentiment, that they've just been able to go through their life and just actually give life a go and know that regardless of if they fail or succeed, it doesn't actually change the way I feel about them. And actually, I will just say one thing, one parenting thing that I do all the time, is I tell my kids that, and this happens every single time I get angry with them, right? Every time I get cross and I tell them I'm disappointed, I always say, no matter how disappointed or angry I am with you, just know that your love is safe. Right? Like this reaction to how I feel about how you've acted has nothing to do with how much you are loved. That is never going to be impacted. You're always safe in love. So I'm going to get grumpy, I'm going to get angry, but that is safe. And so, yeah, man, I just hope that when in 20 years time, they still carry that into their relationships where they can openly love people and actually feel safe with themselves to open themselves up.
Can I just ask, is that something that you learnt from your parents?
No, I don't think it was. I think what happened was, I mean, I always felt safe in my love for my parents. That was definitely never impacted. But I think it was just going through periods of time where I was really stressed, right? And I just find like getting the kids ready for school was just a nightmare. Just get your shoes on, come on, grab your bags. Like I just felt like I was always telling them off, or always like do this, or I was always just like, man, I'm disappointed that you haven't done this. And I could start seeing it kind of eat away at their sense of self, right? I just felt like I was being critical because I was trying to guide them really, in this direction. But I realized, man, like I just can't be critical all the time without them knowing that they're loved. And I've always told them that they're loved every single night, every 10th word is I love you, whatever. But I could see that in these moments of conflict, especially my oldest son, who would be pushing the boundaries and starting to, he was getting that preteen kind of vibe going on. And I'd be having to ride him a little bit harder because like, hey, he's playing computer games when he's not supposed to, or, he's sneaking candy when he's not supposed to, or whatever the stuff. And so I wanted to be able to make sure that all that discipline that I was doing, it wasn't offsetting this relationship that I'd built with them, because I wanted them to know that when they were having a really hard time, when they were, struggling with something in school, they could come to me because this is a safe place, rather than come to me and I'm just going to be like, why'd you do that? So it's like, it's trying to find that balance, right? And so, yeah, I think it was, I don't know, it just happened one day and it's just kind of stuck.
No, I do like that, man. As I mentioned earlier, kind of coming from a person who didn't know whether he was going to get, who love was a reward thing. Like I had to behave certain ways to feel like I got that, or, it's just the idea that my dad didn't pay attention or seem to have any interest in anything that I did. So it was always felt like you had to earn to get attention, and anything was a prize. And then there would be some praise and some attention when, oh, look, I got this happened. I got this award. Great. That's great. And for one little flicker out of 12 months, in those crucial developmental stages. So, having that phrasing to just reassure them that, hey, I still love, I'm disappointed, or, this action and this behavior is what I am upset about or what I'm disappointed in. It's not you as a person, so being able to kind of teach them that it's the behaviors as opposed to who they are is a really nice thing, I think. So that's really cool.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, Toby, thank you very much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time. And look, I would love to get you back at some point, man, because I feel like I know that from our conversations leading up to this, that there's a few things we haven't actually covered. But thank you very much for sharing the blended families, the moving through separation, the mindfulness, these little practices as well, and also just sharing how it is, feeling like you're missing out on your child's development and actually having the courage. And I want to acknowledge, man, and just say that I'm really proud and I'm in awe of the way that you had that courage to see the career, what you were doing. You weren't 100% passionate about it in the film industry, but you could see the detriment that it was having, and that was the path, and making that decision, having the courage to make that decision. that's amazing, man. And I really hope that that resonates with a couple of people out there, for any guys that are maybe in that situation where they're taking a second look or second guessing the path that they're on, to have that courage and that confidence, man. So it's definitely given me that today. Thank you.
Yeah, man. And thanks for having me on, man. This is like having the courage to do this kind of podcast, right? Because these are the kind of conversations that are really, really important. You know, a lot of us dads, like I'm one of the lucky ones, but in my studio, almost every single day, there's someone in that studio that has got dad wounds, right? It has got a dad that wasn't there, that didn't see them growing up. And so I see it all the time. I see how important it is.
I'll be in there soon,
this
man.
job is the most important job, you know? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got the dad wound couch, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so important, man. It's the most important thing, and yeah, you see the impact that it has, and if we can wake up each day and be 1% better, then it's worth it, right? And I think podcasts like this are really important because there's a lot of people out there that don't have that community. They don't know, they don't even know where to start because these conversations aren't often being had. You know, men are often not very vulnerable, so we don't, expose our wounds. That sounded weird.
That's the truth. It's the truth, man.
Yeah.
You know, we had the first Better Dads Club brunch the other day, and that's I'm really proud and excited for that and to get that going. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast who don't know what that is, check that out on the Better Dads Club website. But basically, it's exactly that. It's a brunch for dads who want to be better role models, who maybe didn't have good male role models growing up, who are confused, who are moving through these experiences. And you and I, we've had similar experiences, and I know many other men that have had similar experiences, some that have had worse and different, but everybody's different. There's 8 billion people on the planet, as my coach says. There's 8 billion people, which means there's 8 billion different ways to be a human. So, but if we can all learn from each other and share those things, as what it used to be, sitting around the campfire and having those conversations and being able to, but even in tighter, smaller communities, to go, actually, well, this is how we do it, and here's a bit of a framework. And then, to your point around the blended family, in terms of the way that you're parenting your kids versus the way that your wife was parenting hers or wanted to parent her kids, and then how you guys, negotiating that, or I don't know, even know if negotiating is the right word. It's just coming to terms with that. It's great because other men need to understand that too. I think there's all of this talk about there, and you and I are both entrepreneurs, and I think that there's a lot of people out there that think that it's not even about being an entrepreneur. It's the celebrating the solopreneurship. Like, look at everything that I'm doing by myself. Like, fuck, man, the business that I excelled at, that worked, it worked because it wasn't just me doing it by myself. And I'm sure, when you're an entrepreneur and owning your studio, but at the same time, like, you're working on projects and with music, and, there's a song, and a song is not just one. I mean, obviously there's people like Beck and that sort of thing out there where Dave Grohl, where they are everything. But, for the most part, it's also getting everybody in, working together and putting these pieces together. And when we all come together and we work together to create really what we want to bring into the world, that's what makes it better. So, I welcome the men that are scared, that are nervous, the men that are confident, because the men that are confident can bring that energy in. And then the men that are nervous, part of the thing for me, as I mentioned to one of the other guys the other day, is like with Better Dads Club, is it's a place to be vulnerable and to ask questions and to not feel like you're an idiot, because it's just expected that we're all asking questions here. We're all failing. We're all making this shit up as we go along. The technology that was available when you were growing up is far different to the technologies that are available for our kids, and the battles that we're going to be negotiating with governments and with privacy laws and all that sort of stuff are going to be far different. And we've got to be alert to it, and we've got to be awake, and we've got to navigate it, and we've got to do it together, because it's all changing quickly. And, one of the conversations we actually had around the brunch table the other day was, dealing with it when, your kid is over at their friend's house and they've got a screen, or they've got, their own mobile device or something, but that's not something that's happening in your house. You mentioned that you very little screen time in your house. Same thing with me. Like, I sat and watched Aristocats twice with my son, and he's 3.5, and that's kind of the only movie that we've watched, and we've only done that when he's been sick. But other than that, it's just like, no, we've got imagination. We're going to be doing drawing. We're going to be, playing with our hands. We're going to be, doing cars. We're going to be doing some wrestling. We're going to, do some things that challenge the body. So, I think having that confidence where there's a lot of guys out there that are even probably struggling with that and just wanting to put their kids in front of a TV screen because it's just easier. They're working long hours there, and this is part of why I want to get you back because we didn't touch on your health routine in terms of how you're able to work those long hours but still come back, cook dinner for 5 kids, have that time, and then get back in. So, would really love to hear about that on the next one. But anyway, waffling on a little bit long now, but thank you so much again. Thank you for your vulnerability and for leading and for being so open and honest here, because I think this is just going to be the stuff that will help. Leading with vulnerability will help other men open up. And, maybe you might get some random phone calls from people who don't want to work with you, but they just want to go, hey, Toby, I'm going through this, man, and I think you might be the only person who understands me.
Yeah, man. Reach out for sure.
Sweet. Okay. Anyway, look, I'll let you go, but Toby, thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening, man. I hope you get home and get to see your kids before bedtime.
Sounds good, man. Hey, thanks heaps for having me. That's great.
Hey, you're welcome, bro. See you soon.